what Terry knows, and I know, but some of you may not know, is that for the past year, Terry has been a professor in the School of English. And so coming to the end of his year, and myself as the head of English, this is a very special occasion because Terry is coming to the end of his probation as a member of the school. And so really, it all rests on this evening's performance. Not to make anybody nervous or anything. So I'm here to ask you some questions, and I'll ask some questions first, and then we'll throw it over to the audience who can ask whatever they want. Okay, Professor Sir Terry Pratchett. I gather that the population of the world has just passed the 7 billion mark over the last couple of weeks. As a professor, what do you think of that?
What worries me is all those people tonight scurrying around as they do to see that we get to 8 million as soon as possible. You can't be a long-time fantasy and science fiction reader to think about this sort of stuff. And you just wonder, they're talking, is it 15 million by when?
By the middle of the century. 15 billion by the middle of the century, I
yes.
believe.
How many of them will still be alive, as it were? You see what I mean? I remember when I was in my early teens and really getting interested in electronics. And my dad, who quite liked electronics, would drive me up to Tottenham Court Road, where they used to have all the army surplus stuff from the war. You could buy wonderful, literally Second World War electronic items and receivers and stuff. For a kid who wanted to play with radios, it was absolutely magnificent. But the point was we could drive into a London which looked like something out of The Prisoner. It was more or less, there was definitely traffic, but you could actually see bits of ground between each individual car. There were actual spaces. I mean, Dad could more or less park where he liked. Try that in London now. Absolutely impossible. Everything's bigger. There's so many more people. I've been working on just for something I've been doing with Jack Cohen and Ian Stewart. I've just been wondering about a concept that we came up with in the Science of Discworld series, that we may not be Homo sapiens. We might instead be pan-narans, which means the storytelling chimpanzee. And what's the first story that the pan-naran tells himself? He tells himself that he is Homo sapiens. However, I rather think that Homo sapiens would be doing something a little better than we are. Homo sapiens wouldn't use the sea both as a shithouse and as a larder. That's only the beginning of our crimes, but there's one that actually crosses mine. And it's one I'm now sort of getting material for. This is just a secondary thing. It's not a Discworld thing or anything. But,
I mean, we're used to seeing...
Can I just finish this bit? Yeah. Who actually runs the Earth? Nobody. There's no one that controls.
So you would.
Oh, well, I'd like to, of my own personal one, yes, highly so. Everything goes on. No one thinks about the future. Politicians absolutely certainly don't think about the future, because the future is about 3 years away. Can I be re-elected? So there isn't long-term thinking. One of the things I came across, discussing this with other people, Homo sapiens, if we were him, would have by now put a colony on Mars. Not for any particular reason that we want to explore Mars, but it would be interesting to have some humans living there so that when this planet is actually nearly wiped out in the next war, at least they can come back and start it up again. Spares. But we do not think globally. We don't think about the world. Not enough people think about the world as a living thing, which it effectively is from our point We no longer have anything resembling a space shuttle, so the next time a bloody great asteroid is about to strike, it's just prayer. And they seem to turn up an awful lot, especially in Hollywood. It just sort of, regrettably, I won't be alive by then to find out what happens. But it just seems, when you start thinking things like, what are humans for? What should we be doing? Why are we here? Was there some purpose? We know what the purpose of clams are. It's to become clam chowder. But it's only their purpose from the point of view of us. I don't know what the purpose of clams are from the point of view of clams.
To make more clams?
Well, this is very academic, isn't it?
Yes. Well, that's what we're here for.
Yes, it is. Well, I know. So you make more clams. When has the world got enough clams? Actually, from where I sit, if there's enough clams, that's good enough for me. But it just, you start wondering, why? Why do we keep breeding? Why do we keep going? Why is all this happening?
Do you think we need imaginative fiction, science fiction and fantasy in order to present ourselves with alternatives to this horrible future that we've been?
Well, is it going to be a horrible future now in the world that Larry Niven has? I think the world is even more crowded than where it is now. But they managed to deal with it in some ways. And I know how they managed to deal with it. They deal with it because it's in a book of fiction. We know what the pressures are on the inner cities. We know that we are fast using up things that we cannot replace. Oh, there's still plenty of iron in the crust and things like that, but there are rare earths and things which are running out. We are running out of small but very important things that we need. But we don't really worry about it very much because no one's going to live long enough to worry about it. But it'd be nice I'd like to see the human race go on for a while. According to my friend Jack Cohen, the average species on this earth has lived for, or lives for, I think it's 5,000 years. We haven't got a lot. We haven't got a lot of time to go.
I think we better start going to Mars.
No! That's partly what's wrong. There are some nice Americans in this room. There are some that talk through their asses. And there really are people in the States that believe that we should use it all up because God wants us to, and then he can make it all better again. Yes, probably, but, where's he going to put everybody while he's doing it? You know what it's like being in someone else's flat and you stumbling over their stuff. No, I just don't go for the religious side. I think if there is any intelligence overseeing the universe, it wants us to use our own, and I don't think we are doing it. However, that's just the thing that fills my nightmares.
I think it's starting to fill mine as well. From an academic perspective then, one of the things that I have to ask you is what have you been up to for the last year or so? Have you been doing your homework?
Yes. Annoying governments. That was one. Certainly annoying priests. That was another one. So I think I'm looking for a few scores here, I finished a book called Snuff, which I think has been the fastest selling book in the English language. I don't believe it, but my publishers say that this is the case. Certainly written by an Englishman, anyway. Yeah, that's probably right.
So tell us about pissing off the government then.
it dawned on me some time ago that I don't have a boss saving your honour's presence. And I can't get sacked by anybody, and except for the readers if I don't come up with the next book on time. And so I can speak my mind about things, if I can do it properly. And so you may be aware, because you saw it here, I took part in a documentary, which in fact did show a man dying, when I say of his own accord, as it were, in Switzerland. I imagine that got quite an airing here. Yes? And how did it turn out? What did people say?
Well, my sense of it from reading the press both in the UK and here was that it was very widely misrepresented, as a matter of fact.
Why do you say misrepresented?
Because it was received by people who either hadn't seen it or had seen it but only seen what they wanted to see. As some kind of ghoulish
I can fill you in on that. 7,000 people wrote to complain. There was two interesting facts. Apparently, most of the letters looked remarkably similar. And they all turned up, I'm not kidding, on the night before the programme had been broadcast. That's because the Care Not Killing Alliance presses a button and various congregations do what they're told. All the stuff we had, twittering and tweeting and Facebooking and all the other stuff, and indeed stuff that people would cross the street to talk to me about. People were somehow in awe of it, amazed at it. And one thing, the only negative thing that there was when they said, it's such a shame that the poor guys had to go all the way to Switzerland to die in peace. And in fact, I can tell you now, if they didn't have to go to Switzerland, let me think, this is very nearly, we're coming up towards the anniversary of their death. They would probably still be here if they knew that it's something that could be done here. And this is why, for example, I have set up with another gentleman a commission to look at how this could be done in the UK.
And is it feasible?
I have to be very careful about this. The commission itself was set up by Dignity in Dying, which you may have heard of. I and another person have funded it. They have chosen, that's the Dignity in Dying, chosen public figures that have said, as it were, aloud, that they think that some form of assisted dying could be possible, should be possible in the UK if the right measures could be taken, yada yada, for the possible frauds and all the other things, and people pushing Granny down saying, yes, she really wants to go. And indeed, you didn't see it, very much of it is in our programme. We actually spoke to people in Belgium and Holland, especially a guy in Holland who oversaw how they have assisted dying in Holland, and it seemed to me a very sensible way they were doing things. It was done by doctors who were sympathetic to the patients, or who did assist the patients. And the walls of the temple didn't shatter. It happens, it still goes on, as it does in Switzerland. You may remember that not long ago, the Swiss in some of the cantons had an opportunity to vote no to assisted dying, because they've had it for a long time. Not only did they vote yes, let's keep it, they also actually voted to allow Dignitas to also carry on its operation, which are largely picked up by Brits and Germans. Brits because we're not allowed, and Germans because by no feat of the imagination is there ever going to be assisted dying in Germany until a whole lot of people are dead. I mean, we don't have to spell it out. There are some things that aren't going to be uttered. But Brits come along there, and it was very weird, because I was standing there. I mean, the whole experience was a harrowing experience. Being in the room when Peter died, for example, every single moment is etched on me. I mean, it's like a scar, but it's not a bad scar. It's a scar that you kind of carry playfully. And I was waiting for the elevator, and there was a Swedish lady came up to me and said, hello, are you English? Because they speak better English than us, and they like to speak English. And she said, are you English? And I said, yes. She said, have you come to die? And I said, well, I hope not. She said, no, but I'm with a crew, and I told her what she's doing, and she said, it's a funny thing. Back in the 1960s, you had abortion available in England, and it wasn't available here. And so many of the girls went to England, and now the trade is going back the other way. And she said, and just as I'm sure you would have preferred the girls to be going to England because they would like to see Big Ben in the Houses and Parliament, we would rather like it if you came to Switzerland for the flowers and the skiing. But she said, we understand what it's like. That's why I think they voted to keep it going, because, as it were, the far right can't always have it its own way, and people were deciding that sometimes we have to go a little outside the law to find a law which is a little more friendly. And so I got involved in that, really because it was a fight that I thought had to be fought. Because it is about the rights of the individual. And if you're going to allow... I've got so much to say about this, it's fast. Remember, when we were kids, how old... You can whisper if you like. How old are you?
I'm 43.
Oh, yeah. Tiny. I'm in the 60s. In the 60s, when I was growing up in the 60s, people were hanged. I wouldn't necessarily say that you shouldn't be hanged now, but nevertheless, some of them. And of course, abortions were illegal, and of course, gays shoot them on sight. All these things have changed. Now, if someone tries to commit suicide, for example, which was really a crime, now they get looked after. I mean, people, they see it as a cry for hope. But they don't get thrown in prison or put into the loony bin or anything like that. They used to be. Isn't that great? Isn't that how governments think? Someone's tried to commit suicide. Let's put him in jail to teach him that life is thoroughly worth living. And that seems, when I mention this to kids, they can't believe it was like that. And as for the gays, we now have, certainly a better class of hairdresser. And indeed, you don't know. It's like everything else. You don't know. You don't know. Nothing. Yeah. I think it was a young lady I was working with said, if you don't like gays, what are you doing in the entertainment industry? So it doesn't. It turns out all these dire warnings don't matter. People just went on being people, and that was it. So I think if we did have assisted dying here, it would become something that happens. No one will be encouraged to go, and in fact it will be just slightly difficult to go. In other words, a few little obstacles, because you don't want someone to feel, I'm feeling a bit off today. No, You can't ask a government to sign up for that sort of thing. Or I'm a bit depressed. But if you have a serious, debilitating and ultimately killing disease, then choosing a moment to leave before the end seems a remarkable human thing, because there's no animal that can do that. Well, unless it's lemmings, and I never actually believed that one.
Someone told me that they didn't do that.
No, they didn't. I know they didn't. It was, but someone told me it was Disney people putting them on a turntable, wasn't it? And spinning them out. This is very academic discourse, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
The point is, it's easy to do this stuff. It's easy to see if someone is compos mentis. Physicians have to do this every day. It's very easy to see if someone has got a serious disease. I mean, if you're going to deny them that, in the current climate, and I don't really want to bring this one in, but it's obviously in people's minds, where the cost of care and the quality of care is continuously going down. Now. We are living in a real slump, I think. If you're going to deny people this, what are you going to guarantee them with in exchange? That it will be absolute first-class care for the rest of your life? Or lying there in some noisome bed with no one paying you very much attention? And I think my generation is thinking hard about this. It will soon be your generation too.
One of the things that I found watching the documentary was that I went into it thinking that I know what I thought about assisted dying, and I thought it was a good thing which should be legislated for. But I came out of it feeling far more ambivalent about it.
Okay, could I say correct your words there?
Yeah, of course.
It is not a good thing.
That's not, of course not.
It is a thing.
Yeah.
It's whether or not it is an acceptable thing. What really... we did the filming, warts and all, with no in these cameramen can be quite obtrusive sometimes, but there was none of this. Could we do that bit again? Which would have been rather difficult in the circumstances. It was weird because it's the things off camera. For example, that I was sitting talking to Peter and his wife over a cup of tea, only minutes before he went to sit in the chair. And we were having a laugh because this was displacement activity. You know about this. And I'd actually just told them, because I have to take lots of pills, I had told them, I have to beware of the toilet pin. Now, anyone that has to take a lot of pills every day, especially if it's a gentleman, knows that most wash basins available to us just have a little space where you can get your pills out and put them. And these days, pills come wrapped in various sorts of miscellaneous metal and stuff. Once upon a time, it was a pill box. You just take it out. Now they have layers of stuff, and you have to punch the whole stuff through to get your tiny little pill out of the other end. And invariably, you use so much pressure to get the pill out, it bounces, it goes up onto the ceiling, hits the ceiling, and you realise that as a bad man, you actually shut the toilet down. And so you hear the little ping coming from the lavatory pad.
I feared you might be about to say that.
That's the toilet pin. And they were both laughing about it, because at that point I realised they would have laughed about anything. But we were actually acting the fools, me especially, simply because that was the way of dealing with the situation. And it was the whole thing was full of so many incongruities that there was no room for outcromities. For example, you may have noticed that outside what we might call the killing room, but which was actually a rather pleasant little room, and it was quite warm. There was a man with a great big curly pipe, a real Swiss pipe, and he was puffing smoke. And it was pure Bergman, because the snow was coming down and the smoke was going up. And so the smoke was going through the snow. And I realised, I know why he was the husband of Erica, who was, let's call her the nurse, who was helping. And he was there as her chauffeur, and I suppose in case anything else was needed. But he couldn't smoke his pipe inside that room. That would be illegal under health and safety. And you put this in your brain, and it doesn't fit, so you're going like this. I was thinking pretty much in the same way that you were in all this. And I was, I can't say not in my right mind. It was probably, in fact, I was probably more in my right mind than I had ever been before, because you're actually passing through all the soft stuff and actually getting right round to where the nitty-gritty really is. And there were so many things that stood out. For example, that Peter's wife, who obviously didn't really want him to go, but having seen that marriage at work over on numerous occasions, I knew that, if you like, I knew that a long-term marriage actually, as it were, includes a third party, which is in fact the marriage itself. And the marriage itself actually reaches the conclusion. It might not be a nice conclusion, but it's the one that the marriage will settle for. So she was there, and it was stiff upper lip. And I think the first thing she said after her husband died was, would anyone like a cup of tea? Which actually, you wanted to burst into tears. And then she went to comfort the young lady who I think was acting as its assistant director at that time, because she was a bit overcome. And she was thinking of everybody else in that very Middle English way, which was actually done to absolute perfection. And I thought, that's brought out, Well, there's a scene where I'm sort of crying on Erica's shoulder and said it makes me proud to be English.
Yes, I remember that.
There are a lot of things that have happened in the world that have made me wish I wasn't English. But for that one occasion, I think I came back to England. But I came back thinking, I can't say this is a bad thing, because it's in your head, you're thinking, a man's dead. That's a bad thing, but he wanted to die. Well then that's a good thing. No, it's not quite a good thing. And so you realise that you have to have a different way of looking at the whole thing. But the point is, he knew where his disease was going, and he knew he wasn't curable, and he'd been an action man, more or less.
He was Smedley's processed peas.
Peas, yes, he Smedley's processed peas. You had them as well as me.
I certainly did.
My feeling was, who can tell him he can't go if his wife and daughter can't? And since the marriage has sorted this thing out, I take you back to what I said earlier. He's not asking anyone else to go. He could, without asking anybody, have slung a rope over a tree and hanged himself for all the trauma of everybody who found him. I once walked along the whole length of a railway track as a young journalist, which was strewn with the pieces of the person that had been run over. Because I heard there was a shout on, and I went up, and I knew that something had happened on the railway track, and coppers can be so nasty to journalists. Said, "Oh, young man, you want to see what's going on, do you? This is what we do." And that was it. Now, that poor woman had smoked, I think, 4 cigarettes in the lee ward of a little hut that the linesman had, because I counted the stubs. She threw the last stub away and walked under the train. I was so overcome that when I wrote the piece, a lot of it I left out because it was too horrible, or too strange, or just too sad. And the police, well, they were burly men. And I thought, if she really wanted to go, if it was really something bad, like a terrible illness, if she could have just gone somewhere where they say, look, we'll just let you down slightly, or whatever, neatly. Not good, but a lot better than the worst. And I knew a lot of coroner's officers, and Pierpoint, the executioner, could, I believe, have someone dead quite neatly in, I think it was 7¼ seconds from coming out of the little cage. He was very good at it, but he didn't think it actually made any difference. He didn't think it actually prevented crime. And he got fed up around the time of Ruth Ellis, as you may remember. So I cannot say I'm a great fan of hanging people. But it seems to me that what Peter did was something pretty wonderful, really. He, as a human being, said, I don't want to take it anymore. I want to leave quite neatly, thank you very much. I've paid my dues to the world. I do not want to put, this is overcoming me. He did not want to live in the belly of the beast. There, that's it. He didn't want to be the nice patient, whether or not he could possibly have been the part of the nice patient. He simply wanted to be out of it, because it wasn't a death sentence, it was a life sentence. And he didn't deserve it. I suppose we all deserve these sort of things by value of being human, but we can make decisions for ourselves. And the same thing with Andrew, the young man. Now, that was a sad case, but he lost his girlfriend, he couldn't get about, and he was very cheerful, and he was a fan of mine. It was weird, because there we were, he was amazed, saying, "Mr. Terry Pratchett, come and see me." And the...
dying.
Yeah, and I said to him, God, crikey, when we're off camera, I said, look, I want to get you to a science fiction convention. There are this stuff to live for, or like hot dogs at least. And he said, no, but we spent ages, there's a whole bit which we never used on camera where I was arguing, what was he arguing? The great SF argument, yes. Was Blake 7 as pants as we really remember it, or what?
Yes.
It really was totally pants, actually.
I seem to remember them, no?
Yeah, and again, but with him, he tried to commit suicide. In fact, he took longer to die. This would be the day before Peter, because he tried to commit suicide so many times that he had more or less his immune system had actually shaped up and made him very difficult to kill. It just took longer, but again, I think they sorted him out. And I was very pleased with what his mother said. Not all of it was used in the documentary, but she really... There is nothing that cheers the cockles of your heart where, let's use Victorian language, a woman of the lower classes that doesn't actually see the running of the world as much to do with her suddenly looks up at those in governance over her and gives them a right bashing. We didn't use much of that on the screen. We let that tone that down, but the first lot came straight from the heart. And the heart was pretty busy that day, I have to say.
Would it be too abrupt a change of subject for me to ask you about the other thing that you've been up to this year, which is your latest novel.
It will be a joy, because every bloody journalist I speak to wants to talk it. But but since you asked, and since we got into it, yeah, that's the whole thing. But snuff was fun, and snuff was one reason, sir, why I don't think I'm a very good teacher.
Why is that then?
Because I've never learned. It's very straightforward, and Rob, identify yourself, Rob, stand up. Right, why aren't you wearing your bowler hat? I brought you after snuff. he doesn't want to wear, he's very shy. I've told you before, and I've told the scholars before, that in my early adolescence I read every bound volume of the magazine Punch between the early 1830s, when it was started by, I think it was by Charles Dickens and also Henry Mayhew, among others, right up to the 1960s, when it started to wobble and then fell down. And it was a satirical magazine. And that meant I read this like you do when you're an adolescent. You read like a combine harvester. And I read it all. I was after the cartoons. I came across Jerome Kane Jerome, Three Men in the Boat. There was a bit of that. He also wrote, and then there was some Mark Twain, so I started reading Mark Twain, and I was following everyone up to Alan Coren, who's left us only a few short years away, and Searles and Seller and Yateman, who actually did 1066 and all that. And tell this to them, they know nothing about it. Well, some of them do, the older ones.
They do.
But it was a tour de force in comedy. And Beachcomber and all these. And I was reading, on top of that, I was reading all the other stuff, the serious stuff that it had Punch had on its other pages, all through the Victorian and Edwardian era, which was often full of the Irish question, and a whole lot of amity between England and Ireland. As far as I could gather, the Irish question is, why don't you use your arms as well?
In dancing?
I didn't get that much. I didn't get much of a laugh for that. I'll try that one another time. But the thing is, what was happening? Here was a kid looking for the stuff. They hadn't invented cannabis in those days. But this was the stuff of dreams. I was finding all this cool stuff in the library and I was reading. But underneath this, I was picking up history, but history from the Private Eye magazine of the time, who was telling it probably the right way, not the way the historians were. So this actually became, I think, a bedrock for a lot of what Terry Pratchett Incorporated becomes.
Did anybody ever say to you, come, Mr. Pratchett, fantasy is a serious business, quests, romance, all of that, there's no place for comedy in it? Or did anybody ever say, you're a comic writer, why are you bringing in elves and trolls and dwarves? Did anybody ever say these things don't go together?
There are some people that think they don't, but there is no one that dares say it to my face. When in doubt, always go back to G.K. Chesterton. He said, people say that that seriousness is the opposite of funny. You've heard me on this before, haven't you? And he said, this is not the case. The opposite of funny is not funny. The opposite of serious is not serious. Something can be funny and serious at the same time. And he said, in fact, that funny can be under the locked door while seriousness is still banging on the handle outside. Because you can slip via a joke or via a chuckle, just something into the mind of the reader. Just change things a little bit. Just turn the world upside down so they see it from a different direction. I'm quoting quite a good writer. Oh yes, that was me. Thought it might have been. Yes, that was out of Nation. So there, I mean, it's fun to do, and it is fun. And I don't know what happened with Snuff, because Snuff actually just went off like mad. It really was. It really was like that. And it was good because I liked writing for Sam Vines. And all the time, the book was pushing me forward. I didn't have to work. It was my... this is where I am a religious man. I believe in Narrativia, the goddess of authors. I think she only works for me. I don't know about the others. I was flying on the wings of my lady Narrativia because Snuff unrolled itself all the time, and suddenly you know it's like you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, but you just pick this up and that goes there. Oh, and this one goes there, and this one goes there, and this one goes there, and it was just coming all out of my head. I don't know what that process was. All the stuff I was doing in the keyboard was probably fatuous, but it was actually coming out and going down. And we polished it up again, and I liked it a lot, and we sent it off, and it went well. And what did I want to... The one thing was very interesting, I think, especially to people here interested in writing. I couldn't have written Snuff had I not been married for quite a long time. Because then you understand how a marriage works. If it goes on for a long time, that's why I was talking so confidently about Peter. If it goes on for a long time, a marriage, you know, sometimes a marriage can be like stone, if you see what I mean, against anything that tries to get past it. And so Lady Sybil was easy to write for, and so was Sam Vines. And curiously enough, I could write for Sam Vines because in a curious way I had a modicum of what he had. Because Sam Vines was born in a gutter, I wasn't. I was born in a house which, in the old Monty Python sketch, you know, we had no roof to our house. We only had a shed. You had a shed? Luxury. That one, I could have gone through that one because the house I was brought up in had no running water, no electricity, no gas, quite a lot of mould, outdoor toilet, very much outdoor. But it had a lot of love, and that's what worked. And so believe me, because I'm writing my autobiography at the moment with one hand, really you can draw a line from the minute I read The Wind in the Willows, the book that actually really enthused me. From that moment, you could draw a line to me becoming an author. It would be a straight line. You could actually follow it through the requisite bits, because you know, it was like a ley line. One of the things I like about Wind in the Willows, and I found this out as a kid, which is weird because a kid shouldn't have been able to do it like this, but I remember thinking like this. I was thinking, this is weird. Roll, mat, badger, toad. Right. The badger is wearing a coat. The mole, and can also get into a mole hole. Now, the toad can drive a motor car. Now, I know you can put blocks on the pedals, but there is... You know, so I thought, but this book is fooling me into believing this is true. And I actually was thinking like that as a kid, and I think, you can do wonderful things like this. You can actually change what the world is just by changing the world. And if you do it in a way that draws the people in, you've won. And I actually do remember, it took me a long time later on after that before I could really piece it all together, but it was, I want some of this. The world doesn't have to be what it looks like. It can be something else. And if it's something else, it might look, if it's something else, then what will now look by from that vantage point, look like from that vantage point. So there we are. Was there a question?
Oh, no.
That was an answer.
Oh, thank you. I think it's time that we invited the audience to ask questions, if that's all right.
Yes, by all means.
Anybody wants to put their hand up?
Early on, you posed the question, what is the purpose of hugging siblings? Just wondering, do you have an answer, or are you prepared to give an answer?
I have an answer which suits me. Your mileage may be different. I believe the job of the human race is to tell the universe what it is. There. Something like that. We're doing quite well at it at the moment. Next question. Yeah. Look back. Not really. The version of Alzheimer's I have is a fairly slow one. Indeed, at the moment, one of the things that really worry me are the other things that you get when you're getting older. I mean, just that less stamina for things, and so a lot of things which I might attribute to Alzheimer's tend to be sometimes more attributable by being in your early, mid-60s almost now. Things do change for some people. And of course, I remember my dad. It's funny, I've got a picture of my dad and my mum in the kitchen. And I can look at the picture of my dad and the same bone structure and everything. They say that when you look in the mirror, you could, as you get older and you look in the mirror, you see the face of your father. I said that to one of my mates once. He said, "I'll try that. I think my father was a squaddy." I will also tell you that partly as a, shall we say, this is something you might not know. When I wrote Colour of Magic, second fantasy book, I'd already written a science fiction book. I wrote Colour of Magic and sent it off. Didn't think very much about it. I then started on a work called The Long Earth. As it happened, Colour of Magic was very successful, and followed by The Light Fantastic, and followed by Equal Rights, and yada, 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 all the way up until we get to the present day. Had it not been so popular, I would have probably turned after The Colour of Magic to something I dreamed up called The Long Earth. And it was fairly simple. It was that a device is found to allow humanity to get into what we might call the quantum Earth. Every possible Earth that in quantum theory, the nice thing about quantum theory is no one really understands it anyway, so you can pick which bit you want. All the Earth that could possibly be. And what would make it interesting, I thought, is if we found that we were the only humans ever that the gap between sapience and non-sapience was so difficult to get through. It had only ever happened once, as far as we know. Anyway, at this start of the book. I thought that would be fun, because if we now have access to 1 billion trillion worlds, what is worth anything? What is land worth? What is anything worth? Because it's all there. You don't have to strive. There's the fruit on the trees. There's enough to go around. The terrible causerie of starvation is gone. There's enough for everybody. There's more oil than we can probably use. It's all there for the taking. You can walk into it. It's actually here. You just have to get into the right bit. How will that change humanity? Because we've always been tribal. We get together to defend our space. But at the same time, it does not escape my notice that when there's some terrible tragedy, a lot of people, almost without being asked, pile into trucks and aeroplanes and go and help pull people they've never met out of the ruins. What are we? So you start off with this fantasy idea, and you start thinking all kinds of things about why we do the things we do. And so I thought, I can't do this one just by myself. There's so many ramifications, there's so much stuff to do. And I've got a friend called Steve Baxter, who is the best hard SF writer in the UK, I think. And I said, do you want to have a go on this? And he went through it and said, yeah, sure. So we'll be doing it together. And I'm working on it part-time, and we'll be getting together before Christmas to get all the bits we're doing in a line. Just for the sheer fun of it, just to see what we could do. Because you just can't write Discworld the whole time. That's why I wrote Nation, for example. Nation won me awards and lots of stuff, and it was great fun to do. Right? I did Nation because once it was in my mind, there was actually no possible way that it would ever get out of it unless I wrote the damn book.
So is the Long World?
It's called The Long Earth.
The Long Earth. One of your is that an imaginative answer to the questions we were?
Well, it was just you test out what ideas are like, and you can test them out in fantasy. So what would it be like? I mean, what constrains us? What would? I mean, take the simple thing. How much is gold worth when everyone can have their own Sutter's Mill? Now, it still has some usage. Now, how do you run a colony without currency? But what's currency? What does currency actually represent? I won't go into too many details because you should never talk too much about a book you're writing. But there is this thing where, so when everyone's got, lovely truck garden, they can actually cook, everyone can live like early man, more or less, hunter-gatherers, but possibly in a better class of vehicle. But how do you pay the doctor? Or because the doctor is also, what can you give the doctor that the doctor can't get for himself quite easily? And then you think, yes, some things that men can make, which would be very valuable. So that starts you going down quite interesting corridors as to how we put things together and how we run things. And it starts telling us something about ourselves. Because in the long earth, the most valuable thing there ever is the person next to you. Something else? Yeah. Shall we talk about Oh, anything.
Yeah. Any questions?
Sorry, you probably get this question all the time, but I was just wondering, what's the favourite book? What's your favourite book that you've ever read, and your favourite book that you've written?
That's a hell of a question to ask a guy with 2 libraries. I would say the one that actually, you see, it's like you love your children for different reasons. The Napoleon of Notting Hill taught me about paradox. That's G.K. Chester, and it's a wonderful book anyway. Then The Wind in the Willows got me reading first as a kid, so that's a good one. Then, even in modern times, there are books which I really, really appreciate having read. One of them is called Feeding Nelson's Navy. It was written by a woman, I forget her name, because I wasn't expecting this. And she posits the question that at the beginning of the Peninsular Wars, everyone knows that Nelson's fleet was victualled with bad pork and shoddy weevil-infested flour. Everybody knows that. So here's the question. How come we beat up everybody else? And actually, she went into... she goes into a lot of details about this. Every single man, every single seaman had, I think it was 5,000 calories a day. That's a lot of calories. But they were running up and down lines, they were moving great big cannons, they were the oil, they were the pistons that drove the ship. So you had to keep them fed. And there were rules, and there were fantastic rules. And they were for rules written by bureaucrats, they were magnificent rules. I can tell you some. For quite a long time, the government wasn't allowed to give the men potatoes. I'm sorry to say this is true, because potatoes were a worthless plant, suitable only for slaves and one other country, which actually, I read that and thought, this is actually nuts. How could anyone have actually thought that you don't, that you shouldn't give people? It's come to my notice that most of what you might call the peasant societies of Europe tend to be small. Until you get to Ireland, where you had the navvies, that actually, whose brawn built most of England's waterways and a lot of the railways. I remember reading in an old book about Ireland, some guy, I think, who had said he had some 25 pounds of potatoes every day. He lived on that. Herring, which he called kitchen at the time. Kitchen was anything that really wasn't potatoes. and a lot of buttermilk. And that's what he kept him going. And he was a big, big man. And certainly, the Duke of Wellington wanted as many Irishmen among the soldiery, but I don't know why the senior service was so down. But there were other things. They used to eat in fact, used to eat rats. That's perfectly okay, no worry about that. A well-grilled rat, especially if you've been eating the ship's biscuits, that's corn-fed. And what fish? Because fish was free. If the government could get away with giving them fish, they'd be given fish all the time. There were magnificent stoves on the ships. And they were red hot day and night. And the men, being sailors, thought about just one thing: food. Women, we've forgotten about women. There were rules. If you'd run out of beef, they had to have a certain amount of pork. If they ran out of raisins, they had a certain amount of... everything was laid out. It was a barrack room lawyer's paradise. The men could fish, and if they caught their fish, the cooks would cook the fish for the mess, because they had very different messes, as you would imagine. And that was fine. But they would never appear on the official menu. That was extra stuff. And they were always hungry and always wanting more food. On one occasion, when we were blockading somewhere in Spain, one ship, as part of the blockade, sent a little jolly boat along somewhere down the coast and spoke to the Spanish and arranged with a Spanish farmer to have allotments on his fields. And for quite a long time, while the blockade was going on, the men were going down a boatload at a time and getting on with their allotments and growing stuff and bringing back to the boat. That's what I call a way to have a war. A bit of gardening in between the gunfights. Just like we have in Middle England. Allotments.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we should call...
but you haven't actually told me how I'm doing as a lecturer.
This was what was coming next. Before that, I'd like to invite you all for a glass or two of wine. There's a reception outside. But in answer to Terry's question, I think we'll keep you.
Oh dear.
Hang on a minute, we haven't quite finished yet.
I just want to put a noose around my neck on this one. I am not certain that you can start from scratch in teaching someone to be a writer. I think you can find someone who has a writer inside themselves and coax that writer out. But I think you can say this for just about any trade. I have many hobby horses. One of the things is that certainly in the UK, manual labour has been downgraded, especially since Mrs. Thatcher, which is why we get so many immigrants in to do the jobs that Brits can't or won't do, or there's not enough of them to do all these things. And of course, they want to settle down. I don't blame them. And then people say, now we have overpopulation, and we have a lot of people on the dole because they're not academic and they haven't got a trade. We've done so many bloody stupid things since I was in my teens that it makes me ashamed of the country. It really is. I don't know what it's happened right here. Now, if you can't use a keyboard, it isn't a proper job. Well, that's what I think. But in fact, I don't use a keyboard anymore. As you know, I talk to my computer. It's very good. And I was very surprised the other day. I was talking about serendipity, and I was talking about my lady narrativia. I'm also working on a book which now has the name of Dodger, and it's set in Victorian England. And Rob, as my witness, I was researching it as I was going along and shouting out to him, how old was Queen Victoria and blah, blah, blah. And he was coming up with the Google all the time. And every fact I wanted just dropped into my hand. It was absolutely superb. And I think one of the best bits of the thing, I think it was Sainsbury's, I was speaking to a lady about another matter, and she turned out to be the great-great-granddaughter of a gentleman called Bazalgette. Now, you know, and I know that he was the genius of a plumber who actually rebuilt the sewers of London after the Great Stink in the 1850s. And I thought, right, that was the exact, knowing someone that knew something about Bazalgette and can tell me a lot about him, that possibly intimate things that family knew that the historians didn't. I thought, oh, I like this. Thank you, Narrativia. Send me another one, please. And all the time these came. Now, how many people in here, for example, have heard of a lady called Angela Burdett Coates? Anyone? Why do you know of them, her?
I worked for the Dictionary of Irish
Irish?
Well, she comes in as a relation of some of the folk we have.
Right. She was one of the most wonderful women of the early Victorian period. She was, I believe I'm right in saying, a billionairess in the time when millionaires were actually what you think of as a millionaire, not just some bloke in London that's happened to have his house for quite a long time. And yet she was the granddaughter of one of the founders of Coutts, the Queen's Bank, and mine too, as a matter of fact. And never see her in there, you know, doing a check or anything. And she got the whole lot when he popped his clogs. And she set about giving it away in proper ways. She would give it to churches, but only for, not for religious reasons, but for charitable ones. So if they were running charities, she would give them money. She'd pick up snotty boys on the street and said, have you got a job? Right, I tell you what, I'll set you up as a boot black, with all you need. Because the kid would have no money. But now, you know, people needed their shoes shone. It's not necessarily the best job you can have, but he'll get a grub steak out of it, and he might be going to, you know. And she was actually on the side of the Aboriginals of America, of Australia, before most people had even heard of them. When the St Paul's needed new bells, she paid for them. She paid for just about everything. She set up the ragged schools so that the kids of the poor could get some kind of learning. She actually proposed marriage to Lord Wellington, who I think she was such a powerful lady. He'd defeated Napoleon, but I thought he couldn't possibly defeat her. And just finding her, because she's going in the book as a character, and researching her. Yes. How many people like this are there that I haven't heard about? And I'm starting doing the research for that. And it's just great. It's a lot of fun. But Narrativia always hands me a good one every day.
Well, in your inaugural lecture last year, you mentioned that until you found yourself in Trinity, the most exalted position which you then held was
Blackboard monitor.
Mm-hmm. And so, as a token of our esteem and of our thanks, I want to make an honest Blackboard monitor of you. We have a gift for you, so I'd like to present you this.
Whatever it's going to be, I don't. A Blackboard monitor. Do you want me to open it?
I think it should be opened.
Okay. Shame to...
Just tear.
Well, see, my wife encourages me to do it properly. So
That's just mine, yes.
Yes, but she's not here, hooray! That's also what happy marriage is all about. I wonder. It's got... Oh dear me.
Professor Sir Terry Pratchett, blackboard monitor, now has his own monogrammed blackboard duster. So
Yes.
I think that makes it official.
Thank